Part 29. The legitimate daughter of the prosperous medical fragrance will not marry. Author, Jinchi. Chapter 281. Chapter 281 Waiting for you to marry me. Fan Kinjao's hand shook and he almost dropped the white soft cloth in his hand. This person is always like this, no matter how he behaves or speaks or does things, he can always make people feel warm instantly. But maybe even he himself doesn't know that the smile hanging on the corners of his lips never reaches his eyes. Such a person either sees the changing world too clearly, or he is a heartless and good-natured person. Fan Kinjao naturally knew that Bailey Fengming must be the former. In fact, even she never thought that one day she would be penetrated by such a cold person. I have remembered this kindness, and the phoenixes are singing in the hundreds of miles. If you need it in the future, I, Fan Kinjao, will go through fire and water without hesitation. The matter has come to this, and it is useless to worry about anything else. This time I escaped a disaster, but I still can't take it lightly. I'm afraid that the road ahead will be even more difficult. Bailey Fengming raised his eyebrows when he heard this, and the smile in his eyes grew stronger, then stopped hiding. Okay, just wait for me to marry you. Fan Kinjao paused while tying the white soft cloth with his fingers, and then concentrated on bandaging it again. Waiting until everything was settled, she slowly raised her head and looked directly into his eyes. Bailey Fengming, I won't hide anymore, I won't hide anymore. I'm waiting for you to marry me. Bailey Fengming was stunned for a rare moment, and even the smile in his eyes that had not completely faded was frozen. After she was reborn, she was full of hatred. She was already ready to fight alone, but he stepped in without even saying hello. Can't drive it away, can't drive it away. Let's just leave it like this. He wants that chair, and she can help him get that chair. She wants the flower boy to live an upright life, and only he can do it. Since we are entangled, we might as well continue to be entangled. The road ahead is full of thorns, and two people walking side by side may have to stumble, but it is always better than one person getting ahead. With his arms tightened, Fan Kinjao suddenly leaned forward and ran directly into the embrace filled with Zi Shuxiang. Bailey Fengming held her in his arms, no longer struggling and defensive, and finally heaved a sigh of relief. He gently kissed her red earlobe and said in a soft voice, "Ayao, thank you. Thank you, I finally found you. Thank you for allowing me to make up for the loss and guilt I had suffered." The warm voice blew into his ears, and Fan Kinjao trembled with itchiness. He instinctively wanted to dodge, but in a daze, he chose to drop all his defenses and snuggle into the embrace in front of him. Xiaoxian, who was walking in a hurry, lifted the tent curtain and walked in. "Miss Kinjao, the third prince of Xianbei." Before he finished speaking, he was stunned on the spot. Fan Kinjao felt calm now that he had accepted Bailey Fengming. He slowly sat up straight and lowered his head to organize the medicine box in front of him. After a long while, Xiaoxian felt something was wrong and said with a happy face, "Your Highness, are you awake?" Bailey Fengming smiled and nodded, "I slept longer this time. It's a good thing that His Highness can wake up." "Don't worry, Your Highness, there hasn't been much movement in the camp." Lin Yi also sent a message to the main city, saying that everything is going well in the main city, and as he spoke, Xiaoxian I finally felt something was wrong, and then it's frozen in place again. He looked at His Highness blankly, then turned his eyes and looked at Miss Kinjao. Xiaoxian's face turned red and he turned around and walked out. Fan Kinjao's voice suddenly sounded behind him, "Master Xiaoxian, what did you say about the third prince of Xianbei just now?" Xiaoxian suddenly stopped and said, "The third prince of Xianbei has been standing outside for half an hour asking for an audience. In the past few days, Lu Gan would come to see Bailey Fengming every day." Fan Kinjao knew that Lu Qian's visit was fake, but that he came to inquire about Bailey Fengming's injury was real. Bailey Fengming has not woken up, so Fan Qingjie will not let Lu Gan see Bailey Fengming, so that Lu Gan can sit on tenterhooks. Now that Bailey Fengming has woken up, it's time to say something clearly, let him come in. Xiao Xian turned around and looked at Bailey Fengming, who was sitting on the wooden bed. Seeing Bailey Fengming nodding, Xiao Xian turned around and went out to invite someone. A slight wave of confusion flashed through Bailey Fengming's narrow eyes. Lu Gan is so anxious to see me, he's just afraid that one of the reasons is to inquire about my injury, and the other is to feel confident. The so-called confidentness means that Lu Gan does not know what odds he holds in his hands. Fan Qingjie smiled faintly, I'm also curious about why Lu Gan is confident again. This is also the reason why she wants to see Lu Gan. Getting up and walking outside, Fan Qingjie raised his hand and lowered the curtain that separated the tent. Bailey Fengming saw that Fan Qingjie had no intention of letting him follow him, and he didn't even ask. He just leaned on the bed quietly. When he was bored, he picked up a book and read it intently. The curtain of the main tent was lifted again, and Lu Gan walked in with a smile on his face. Fan Qingjie, who was sitting on the chair first, looked indifferent and had no intention of getting up to greet him. Lu Gan didn't care. He first looked in the direction of the curtains in the tent, and then walked to the opposite side of Fan Qingjie. The Prince of Ziliang hasn't woken up yet. Fan Qingjie picked up the teapot and poured 2 cups of tea on his own initiative. Wake up. Then he pushed a cup in front of Lu Gan. Third Prince Xianbei, please sit down. This meaning is very obvious. Even if Bailey Fengming wakes up, he has no intention of letting Lu Gan see him. Lu Gan was stunned for a moment, then he smiled and sat on the chair. So it seems that Princess Jingping is planning to talk to me. Sure enough, having a winning ticket gives you confidence. Fan Qingjie's expression was calm. Your Highness, the Third Highness of Xianbei, I just said it's okay. Lu Gan smiled half-heartedly. I wonder if His Highness the Prince of Ziliang still likes the things in Princess Yunan's car. No matter how he thought about being counterfeited, he had to do with the Ziliang prince. Otherwise, how could Fan Qingjie, a small princess, dare to have such a big appetite and swallow everything? Fan Qingjie nodded, it's priceless, so I like it. Lu Gan did not expect that Fan Qingjie would dare to admit it so simply and clearly. No wonder the Prince of Ziliang would risk his life to save him. It turned out that Fan Qingjie and the Prince of Ziliang had been wearing the same pants for a long time. Now that everyone knows it, Lu Gan doesn't intend to hide it anymore. I never thought that not only Princess Jingping was hiding deeply, but also His Royal Highness the Prince of Ziliang's acting skills are superb, so it's not bad. I miscalculated people's hearts in this matter. I admit defeat. As long as the Prince of Ziliang takes the initiative to suppress this matter, the 2 countries can continue to live in peace. Of course, if the Prince of Ziliang insisting on letting him go, he can also tell the 3rd Prince of Ziliang all the contents of Princess Yunan's carriage. At worst, the fish will die and the net will be broken. Fan Qingjie smiled instead of getting angry. The Third Highness of Xianbei is so confident. I thought I had some kind of victory, but I didn't expect, it's nothing more than this. Lu Gan narrowed his eyes, a fierce light flashing in his eyes. Fan Qingjie, don't be so shameless. End of this chapter. The legitimate daughter of the prosperous medical fragrance will not marry. Author, Jinchi. Chapter 282. Chapter 282. The reason for staying alive. Lu Gan really felt guilty about the gangster incident. Although Xianbei was not afraid of Ziliang, the battle at Huaishang severely damaged Xianbei's vitality. If the Prince of Ziliang really reports to the Emperor of Ziliang that he designed to frame Fan Qingjie and put the Prince of Ziliang in danger, once the Emperor of Ziliang takes the initiative to send troops, no matter whether Xianbei can handle the resistance, in front of his father, it's hard to explain. But now that the Prince of Ziliang conveniently took away the things Lu Gan had hidden under Princess Yunan's carriage, the matter became not so irreversible. Lu Gan didn't expect that the Prince of Ziliang had a hidden edge and actually deceived him. However, since the Prince of Ziliang benefited from this, he also conveniently got the handle on the Prince of Ziliang. As long as the Prince of Ziliang dares to make his intention to kill Fan Qinjiao public in Ziliang, he can directly confront the Emperor of Ziliang about the Prince of Ziliang stealing sheep. So Lu Gan was betting that the Ziliang prince would not dare to break up with him. As a result, what is Fan Qinjiao doing now? Lu Gan gritted his teeth and said, "Fan Qinjiao, do you really think I don't dare to make things worse? When your emperor really suspects the prince, how much can you bear?" Fan Qinjiao chuckled, "The Third Highness of Xianbei is just gambling. An emperor who is suspicious by nature will never tolerate the hidden evil intentions of the prince he promoted. Am I right?" Lu Gan never thought that Fan Qinjiao could speak so easily about matters related to imperial power. Having dealt with Fan Qinjiao several times in succession, he instinctively tensed up and became defensive due to Fan Qinjiao's words. "The Third Highness of Xianbei dared to come to my main camp in Ziliang today, and even wanted to write it off with me and His Highness the Crown Prince in such an arrogant manner. It's just your self-righteous thought that you hold the Crown Prince's handle. It's just His Highness the Third Highness of Xianbei. Have you ever thought, since I dare to sit here today, how can I let you tell our Ziliang Emperor what you know?" Fan Qinjiao raised his lips and smiled. Now that the army has left the territory of Ziliang, no matter how Lu Gan enters the land of Ziliang without authorization, it will be regarded as a provocation or even an attempt to assassinate the emperor. These two reasons, no matter which one they were enough to make Lu Gan unable to eat and walk around. He was afraid that Lu Gan would have died under the heavy soldiers in various cities before he could see the emperor. Even if the emperor has a headache and really wants to see Lu Gan, the people under Bailey Fengming are not vegetarians. They can find any reason to completely eliminate Lu Gan from Ziliang. At that time, let alone seeing the emperor, it will be difficult to find the bones. Lu Gan saw that Fan Qinjiao was serious about tearing his face apart, so he turned around to start. Fan Qinjiao put down the teacup in his hand and called outside, "Send the gift to His Highness the Third Prince of Xianbei." Lu Gan, who had just arrived at the entrance of the camp, suddenly saw Xiaoxian walking in expressionlessly with something wrapped in black cloth on his shoulders. In front of Lu Gan, Xiaoxian pulled open the black cloth. In an instant, the body of the feudal king suddenly appeared in front of Lu Gan. The vassal king, who has been dead for many days, not only shows no sign of decay, but the skin and flesh all over his body are as fresh as if he had just died. Even the hideous wounds are still oozing out traces of blood. Lu Gan took a few steps back in shock, and then looked back angrily. "Fan Qinjiao, what do you mean? Of course I want His Highness the Third Highness of Xianbei to understand that if I can make the dead immortal, I can also make the living unable to speak. Physicians see illnesses, not corpses." Even Lu Gan and even the witch doctors whom Xianbei had always believed in could not keep the corpse from decaying for a long time. Lu Gan looked at Fan Qinjiao not far away, thinking that he was lying if he said he wasn't panicking. Only now did he realize that what the man from the Hua family said was not nonsense. Fan Qinjiao's medical skills were indeed quite good. Fan Qinjiao gently rubbed the teacup between his fingers. Yun Danfan smiled softly. "I originally thought that His Highness the Third Highness Xianbei should already know who I am, but now it seems that His Highness the Third Highness Xianbei does not know, so it's a shame that I've worked so hard to keep His Highness Xianbei alive." Lu Gan clenched his fists and tried his best to suppress the anger in his heart. Finally, his arrogant eyes were filled with a hint of fear. "Fan Qinjiao, what exactly do you want to say? Isn't His Highness the Third Prince of Xianbei really curious about how the Seventh Prince of Ziliang disappeared?" A chill ran down Lu Gan's spine. How could he forget that the Seventh Prince of Ziliang was dead before his eyes? It's just a matter of killing the person and melting his flesh and blood with corpse water. You said you killed the Seventh Prince of Ziliang." Fan Qinjiao did not answer Lu Gan's question, but paused and said, "Xianbei occupied my Huai River and bullied my people in Ziliang. Naturally, I wanted to cut His Highness Xianbei into thousands of pieces in a matter of minutes, but for personal reasons, I, the son of the Hua family, was freed because of this, so I left His Highness Xianbei to live so arrogantly in this world. In the battle at Huaishang, if she wanted her uncles to win easily, she could definitely let Fan Zhao secretly drug Lu Gan. To deal with a person like Lu Gan, a bone-eroding ecstasy the size of a fingernail is enough to wipe him out. But in this case, the flower boy cannot cheat his death as a matter of course. Xianbei will start to fear Ziliang because of this. Once the man in the palace knew that Xianbei would not become an obstacle to Ziliang, my grandfather would definitely be in danger of his life. So, Lu Gan must survive. Only if Lu Gan lives and marries Ziliang, so that Ziliang will always be on guard against Xianbei and fear Xianbei, the man in the palace will have to leave his grandfather to continue to live a stable life for the sake of Ziliang's stability. No matter how much the selfish dog emperor wants to wipe out the Hua family, he has to admit one thing. Only the Hua family in Ziliang can compete with Xianbei. Lu Gan was furious and stared at Fan Qinjiao. She was sitting 1 meter away from him, drinking tea calmly, stepping on him lightly and belittling him to nothing. Under the candlelight, her delicate face was eye-catching, but the sharpness and cold light in her black eyes were like a knife piercing Lu Gan's heart. It was today that Lu Gan learned that the reason why he survived was actually a gift from Fan Qinjiao. Thick murderous intent spread out silently. Lu Gan suddenly rushed towards Fan Qinjiao and attacked, the dagger hidden in his sleeve already turned out in the palm of his hand. The cold light suddenly appeared, and the murderous intention was wanton. It was Xiaoxian who was standing guard at the main camp tent. Seeing this, he turned around and rushed into the camp tent. He just looked at Lu Gan who was approaching Fan Qinjiao. Even if he wanted to take action, it was too late. At the critical moment, I saw an ordinary bowl of soup and medicine flying out of the camp tent curtain and heading towards Lu Gan Po Feng. Lu Gan, who couldn't wait to make Fan Qinjiao's head fall to the ground, instinctively raised his arms to resist as soon as his peripheral vision dimmed, but he never thought that the power of the soup and medicine bowl was surprisingly strong. It was clearly hit on his arm, but it didn't break. Lu Gan was forced to take a few steps back under the collision of the soup and medicine bowl before he was able to stand firm. At the same time, a hand with clear joints lifted the curtain. Bailey Fengming's handsome face suddenly appeared in Lu Gan's sight. Compared to the cowardly flattery and compromise in his memory, at this moment, that handsome face was full of unfamiliar coldness, and those narrow eyes were filled with darkness that was difficult for Lu Gan to see through. Lu Gan was shocked. He knew that Bailey Fengming was not a coward, but he never thought that even his martial arts skills were so unpredictable. If His Highness the Third Prince of Xianbei really doesn't want to leave, you can stay forever. Bailey Fengming's voice was still gentle and pleasant, but the tone in his words was so cold that it made people's hearts tremble. Lu Gan lowered his head slightly, looked at the soup bowl that had not broken even when it fell on the ground, and reluctantly put the dagger back into his sleeve. Lost. This battle is like Huaishang, a complete loss. End of this chapter. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The legitimate daughter of the prosperous medical fragrance will not marry. Author, Jinchi. Chapter 283. Chapter 283. Even eating can't keep up with the hot food. Lu Gan's arrogance has always been justified and powerful. But he never dreamed that one day he would see two wrong people in succession. In the deathly silent tent, footsteps suddenly sounded. Fan Qinjiao stood up and walked towards Bailey Fengming, calm from the beginning to the end, as if the person who had just experienced the line between life and death was not her at all. Lu Qian knew that he no longer had any meaning here. He turned around and was about to leave, but heard Fan Qinjiao's voice sounded again, His Royal Highness Xianbei, stay here. Lu Gan could not bear to look back. Fan Kinjao, who had already supported Bailey Fengming's arm, lowered his eyes and glanced at the black cloth on the ground. I forgot to bring the gift. Lu Gan frowned in anger, but because he was afraid of Bailey Fengming's unpredictable martial arts, he finally wrapped the vassal king in silence, carried the body and stormed out of the tent angrily. Fan Kinjao looked at Lu Gan's quite angry figure and said in a faint voice, I'm afraid Lu Gan himself didn't expect that not only would he lose completely, but he would also have to wipe his own ass. If the body of the vassal king is not burned cleanly, how will Lu Gan explain to the Xianbei emperor once the matter is publicized? The Xianbei emperor never gave him the right to act like an emperor and colluded with the feudal lords to do these disgusting things. Bailey Fengming raised his eyebrows and said, you went to great lengths to let Xiaoxian bring the body of the feudal lord back. Isn't it just to hurt Lu Gan? Fan Kinjao smiled and said nothing. She knew that no matter what she did, she could not hide it from his eyes. Why bring all the hatred on yourself? Bailey Fengming sighed almost inaudibly, his eyes full of helplessness mixed with pampering. So what if Lu Gan hates him? Just a Lu Gan, not worthy of his care. Although Fan Kinjao was still silent, his eyes were surprisingly firm. He doesn't care, but she can't care. Lu Gan returned to the Xianbei camp in anger and threw the vassal king's body into the bonfire without thinking. As long as the feudal lord appears in front of him, he will be able to think of Fan Kinjao's sarcastic face. How can he endure this? Seeing the vassal king's body crackling in the fire, Lu Gan, who was so angry, calmed down. Fan Kinjao was so open-minded and exposed everything, maybe he didn't even know that he had secretly cooperated with 11 Liang Sanhuangzi teamed up to collude. In that case, Lu Gan suddenly evoked a ferocious smile. Suddenly, there were noisy sounds at the entrance of the main camp. Not long after, someone from the marching army came to report, Your Highness, the third prince of Ziliang has arrived at the camp with reinforcements. When Lu Gan heard this, the corners of his lips raised even higher. He came at the right time. He happened to have a lot of new things to discuss in detail with the third prince of Ziliang. Inside the main tent of Ziliang, Xiaoxian also immediately informed His Highness the Crown Prince of the news of Bailey Rong's arrival. Just thinking about it, Fan Kinjao could imagine how hypocritical Bailey Rong's face would look when he came in. She didn't want Bailey Fengming, who had just recovered from a serious illness, to do these frivolous things. She wanted Xiaoxian to refuse to see the prince on the grounds that he was sleeping. As a result, Bailey Fengming, who was lying on the wooden bed, drove first. He said, Brother Three Emperors has come all the way here, and you always want to see him. No need to say more, just invite Brother Three Emperors here. Xiaoxian nodded, turned around and left the camp. Fan Kinjao did not stop him, but when he helped him up and sat on the bed, he said softly, There is no need to work hard for someone who is not worth it. She didn't want to inflict Bailey Rong's hatred on Bailey Fengming. Bailey Fengming raised his lips and smiled slightly, with soft black eyes. The atmosphere just now was really heavy. It is always good to adjust the atmosphere. The imperial doctors in the palace often say that a happy mood is conducive to recovery. Fan Kinjao nodded helplessly. This is indeed what happened. Bailey Fengming seemed to have thought of something and asked again, Ayao, did you bring the medical book with you? Fan Kinjao. Your Majesty, does the Queen know that you are so naughty? Bailey Rongs, who couldn't eat even if he was hot, walked into the camp with 1,000 reinforcements with a gloomy face. While the Major General in the camp was placing reinforcements, he looked calmly in the direction of the Xianbei camp. Go. By coincidence, Lu Gan was also looking at him. Looking at each other, Lu Gan stretched out his arms towards his tent and made a gesture of invitation. Xiaoxian came quickly and knelt on the ground. I would like to send my regards to His Highness the Third Highness. Bailey Rong suppressed his anger and quickly helped Xiaoxian up. How is the prince? Xiaoxian remained silent and did not speak. He just turned around and motioned for Bailey Rongs to go with him to the main tent. Looking at Shaoxuan's depressed expression, Bailey Rongs' heart suddenly surged with luck. Could it be that the prince was already dying? Or was the injury so severe that he became disabled? Thinking like this, Bailey Rongs immediately quickened his pace. In the main camp tent, Bailey Fengming was holding a medical book, sitting on the edge of the wooden bed and reading attentively. His beautiful face is elegant and gentle under the candlelight. Bailey Rongs, who came full of hope, looked at the calm and leisurely Bailey Fengming, who was stunned on the spot as if he had been struck by lightning. How stiff your body is, it shows how hard it was struck by lightning. Bailey Rongs, who had just expected Bailey Fengming to die, looked at Bailey Fengming, whose face and lips were paler but looked better than him, as if someone had poured cold water on him. Bailey Fengming heard the footsteps and said lightly, "Brother Three Emperors is here." Bailey Rongs frowned and pretended to be concerned. "On the way here, I heard that the prince was seriously injured and his life was hanging by a thread. If you feel uncomfortable, don't hold on." Bailey Fengming expected Bailey Rongs' hypocrisy and smiled slightly. "Brother Three Emperors is worried. He was indeed dying a few days ago. Fortunately, Princess Jingping has revived his life with a wonderful hand, and now he is no longer in serious trouble." Bailey Rongs felt another dull pain in his heart. Bailey Fengming really used his life to interpret what it means to be favored by God. Looking at Fan Kinjao beside him, Bailey Rongs forced the corners of his lips to show a grateful smile. The Tao family's medical skills are indeed well deserved. This is really thanks to Princess Jingping. Under the candlelight, Bailey Rongs' handsome face was warm and graceful, with a look of sincere gratitude. Even though he wished he could tear Bailey Fengming into pieces with his own hands, he could still pretend to be a gentle royal brother who cared for his younger brother. In his last life, Fan Kinjao was immersed in this kind of flawless deception and couldn't extricate himself. But now, Fan Kinjao just looks at Bailey Rongs' coquettish behavior and feels sick to his stomach. "Your Highness, the Third Highness, is serious. I am just doing my best. Your Highness, the Prince, has his own destiny and deserves the respect of the Emperor. Receive the blessing of heaven and earth." Bailey Rongs. So Bailey Fengming is blessed with great fortune, but he can't even keep up with Rihu? Bailey Rongs, who was already holding back his anger, is now even more angry and wants to explode on the spot. End of this chapter. The legitimate daughter of the prosperous medical fragrance will not marry. Author, Jinchi. Chapter 284. Chapter 284. As long as you feel happy. Bailey Fengming looked at Bailey Rongs with concern. "Brother Three Emperors, why do you look so bad? What's wrong with you?" Bailey Rongs. He doesn't feel comfortable anywhere. In the main tent, Bailey Rongs' face turned black to ashes. Such a stinky face that was holding back but clearly about to be unbearable, even Xiaoxian could clearly see it. Bailey Fengming seemed not to notice at all, and continued to talk to himself. "I don't think it's because of the hard work of traveling that the Third Emperor brother is so tired and sluggish." Bailey Rongs followed the current and said, "The prince is right, it's not as good as me." Before Bailey Rongs could finish his words, Bailey Fengming looked at Fan Kinjao and said, "I'd like to trouble Princess Jingping to make a pot of tea. It's been a long time since I had a long talk with the Three Emperors. It's been a long night and it's going to be difficult tonight. There is plenty of time." Bailey Rongs stood in astonishment. When Bailey Fengming turned his gaze back to Bailey Rongs, he said with a hurt look, "Brother Three Emperors was like this before. Even though he was exhausted, he still cared about my feelings. Could it be that the Third Emperor brother is unwilling now? But my past. In the past, when you thought I was a soft persimmon, you often ran to the East Palace. At that time, you used the pretext of coming to visit me. Not only did you want to get information from me, but you also wanted to establish a good reputation in front of my father. A caring brother figure, and now you want to run away when you are tired? There is no such thing as easy. Bailey wrongs. Nearly spit out a mouthful of old blood. Bailey Fengming saw that Bailey wrongs was still unwilling to take a seat, and asked doubtfully, "Brother Three Emperors, don't you want to?" Bailey wrongs bit his lips and bled, but he couldn't say the word "don't want to" in the end. Now Bailey wrongs wants to leave, but he can't. Otherwise, wouldn't the title of caring for brothers and loving brothers that he has established over the years be completely null and void? Sitting heavily on the chair, Bailey wrongs felt like crying. Bailey Fengming smiled indifferently and started chatting with Bailey wrongs seriously. Not far away, Fan Kinjao looked at Bailey wrongs, who was about to cry but had no tears and wanted to die. He thought it was a lie to say he was not happy. In the last life, Bailey wrongs relied on his image as a prince to pretend to be noble and unattainable in front of her. Even if she later made a private lifelong arrangement with him, he would always be. He looked aloof, as if giving alms to her. Later, Bailey wrongs stepped on her corpse and waited on the road to ascend the throne and proclaimed himself emperor, and even more arrogantly stepped her into the dust and mud. But just such a person who had done all his high-profile things was brought back to his original state by Bailey Fengming's few words. Looking at Bailey wrongs, who was forced to sit on a chair and forced a smile on Bailey Fengming despite being so angry, Fan Kinjao was shocked in his heart, and he suddenly realized that in the previous life, Bailey wrongs her successful ascension to the throne was due to her, but it was also due to Bailey Fengming's death too early. As the night deepened, the soldiers on night duty in the camp couldn't help but dozed off. In the main camp, in order to deal with Bailey Fengming, Bailey wrongs had to work up his energy and chatted with him for an hour and a half before it was over. When Bailey wrongs finally got up and walked out of the main tent, his was hard. Fan Kinjao looked at Bailey wrongs' scorched back and couldn't help but sigh at Bailey Fengming's methods. Too dark. It was as dark as the bones. Stepping to the wooden bed, Fan Kinjao stretched out his hand to flatten the pillow that Bailey Fengming was leaning on, then helped Bailey Fengming slowly lie down on the bed, and then carefully covered him with a thin quilt. All her movements are methodical and gentle. The slender fingers suddenly gently held her hand. Fan Kinjao looked up along the well-jointed hand, and saw eyes like broken stars looking at her lovingly. It has never been your style to spend so much effort just to make him depressed in the impression. Bailey Fengming means what he says, and his words are bloody. He seems innocent and harmless, but under the influence of taking lives carelessly. Bailey Fengming asked instead, "Ayao is happy?" Fan Kinjao was stunned, recalling Bailey wrongs' face as black as charcoal throughout the whole process, and couldn't help but nodded. Although Bailey wrongs didn't lose anything because of this, she couldn't help but raise the corners of her lips whenever she thought of Bailey wrongs' angry appearance with smoke coming out of his head. The slender fingers suddenly exerted force, and Fan Kinjao was caught off guard and fell on the chest in front of him. Strong arms hugged her thin body tightly, and his thin lips were buried in her ears, blowing hot air gently, tickling her heart. As long as Ayao is happy, it is worth it. This person is not as good as Bailey wrongs, who speaks in a condescending manner and speaks sentimental words of love as if giving alms. But he was like a gurgling warm stream, melting all the coldness in her heart without any haste. Hearing the strong heartbeat in his ears, Fan Kinjao put down his guard and closed his eyes. It turns out that this is what it feels like to be loved. After Bailey wrongs walked out of the Ziliang main camp tent, he did not return to the tent where he temporarily lived. Instead, he came directly to Xianbei's camp on the grounds of negotiating with Xianbei, and walked into the main camp under the leadership of the accompanying troops. Inside the account. In the main tent, Lu Gan was leaning on a chair and taking a nap with his eyes closed. As soon as Bailey wrongs saw Lu Gan's face, he asked angrily, "How on earth are you doing this?" Lu Gan opened his eyes leisurely and looked at Bailey wrongs with a half-smile. "Your Highness, the third Prince of Ziliang does not need to be so angry. Although this plan failed, I have learned a secret that will definitely satisfy His Highness the Third Prince of Ziliang. Bailey Rongs frowned, the impatience on his face was quite obvious. Luganza could tell that Bailey Rongs was on guard, but the more so, the less he could show panic. Does His Highness the Third Highness of Ziliang know why this plan fell short? When he returns to Xianbei this time, his status in his father's heart will definitely plummet. He must not lose the big fish Bailey Rongs again. Only by holding on to Bailey Rongs tightly can we hold Ziliang firmly in our hands. In this way, he, who has control over the situation in Ziliang, will regain his father's attention. Bailey Rongs thought about the meaning of his words. What exactly do you want to say? Lugan curled his lips coldly. Princess Jingping has secretly taken refuge in the Ziliang prince and became one of his minions. Bailey Rongs narrowed his eyes slightly. You said Fan Qinjiao became the prince's staff. Not only that, the prince of Ziliang is not as timid and cowardly as His Highness the Third Prince of Ziliang has seen. Not only is the Prince of Ziliang's martial arts unfathomable, he is also extremely smart and has an extremely smart mind. That's exactly what it is. The illusion presented by the Prince of Ziliang is not only that I have been deceived, but His Highness the Third Prince of Ziliang has also been kept in the dark. Lugan wanted to tell the truth about Bailey Rongs. Only when Bailey Rongs feels threatened will he continue to secretly collude with him. He believed that Bailey Rongs would definitely weigh the pros and cons. Bailey Rongs looked at Lugan in front of him with his whole body tensed up, his face was livid with shock. End of this chapter. The legitimate daughter of the prosperous medical fragrance will not marry. Author, Jinchi. Chapter 285. Chapter 285 The Dire Situation. Of course. Just when Lugan thought he had a chance to win, he heard Bailey Rongs smile coldly. I was willing to join forces with His Highness Xianbei at the beginning because His Highness Xianbei was brave and resourceful, but I didn't know that His Highness Xianbei was actually a dare to be a despicable person. Lugan looked at Bailey Rongs in disbelief, never expecting that he would not believe it. Bailey Rongs snorted coldly and directly threw the secret letter sent to him by concubine Yu in front of Lugan. Your Highness the Third Prince of Xianbei, why don't you read this letter first, and then think carefully about how to compile the lie? Go down. Lugan reached out his hand in confusion and brought the letter in the distance in front of him. With just one glance, my whole body was shaken instantly. Encountering fierce bandits on this trip, the prince bravely led the troops to encircle and suppress him, and was seriously injured. Princess Qingping's wonderful skills brought him back to life, and he was instrumental in saving the prince. The third prince of Xianbei even personally led troops to support him, and when his prince was seriously injured, he ordered a collection of all kinds of precious medicinal materials are just for His Highness the Crown Prince to save the day. I am very relieved to hear this. I have sent someone to inform the Emperor of Xianbei about it. I am also willing to exempt Xianbei from paying tribute for half a year in the name of reward. I hope that the people of Ziliang will remember the 3 years of Xianbei. The prince's love for each other. Bailey Rongs looked at the shocked Lugan with disdain, and now he still wants to pretend to be like him. This time, Lin Yi, who was next to the prince, returned to the main city and explained everything to the emperor in person. The Queen Mother was afraid that there was something wrong in it and spent a lot of money to bribe the people in front of the emperor. However, the people in front of the emperor personally told the queen that Lin Yi knelt down at the time. When he was in the imperial study room, he almost praised the third prince of Xianbei to the heavens. The emperor was forced to have no choice but to issue an order exempting Xianbei from paying tribute for half a year. If his mother-in-law had not written to inform him of these things, he would still be kept in the dark. Bailey Rongs and Lugan set up this plan in order to get the honor of rescuing his brothers while the prince was seriously injured. As a result, everything that should have belonged to him now fell on Lugan's head. With all these things before his eyes, how could Bailey Rongs still trust Lugan? In other words, he now has every reason to believe that Lugan wanted to take all the credit from the very beginning. After all, his honor in Ziliang was enough for Lu Gan to brag in front of the Xianbei emperor, and Ziliang's trust in him allowed him to regain his former status in front of the Xianbei emperor. Lu Gan looked at Bailey Rongs with a gloomy face and angry eyes, and finally realized a serious problem belatedly. No wonder Fan Qinjiao dared to be so frank with him. No wonder Fan Qinjiao dared to tell everything. It turns out that he had been plotted by Fan Qinjiao from the very beginning. Giving half of the credit for suppressing the bandits to him seemed to give him an advantage, but in fact, the credit was like a sharp knife, splitting the collusion between him and Bailey Rongs in two. Now, no matter what he says, Bailey Rongs will never believe him again. The most hateful thing is, now the only vassal king who can prove that he lost his wife and defeated his troops was burned by him himself. In this way, even if he keeps his mouth open, Bailey Rongs will not believe the fact that the vassal king is dead, let alone that he is actually the victim of this incident. Fan Qinjiao, you are cruel enough. Fan Qinjiao stood by the window of the main tent, watching Bailey Rongs, who was hurriedly returning from the Xianbei camp, in anger. He knew in his heart that Lu Gan would hate her to death now. It's just that Fan Qinjiao doesn't care about Lu Gan's hatred at all. The prince was in danger and seriously injured, and the emperor would never let the prince continue to Lu Gan forward. Moreover, we have now reached the border of Xianbei. Even if Ziliang returns the same way at this time, the Xianbei emperor will not find any reason to complain about Ziliang's neglect and disrespect for Xianbei. To put it bluntly, she and Lu Gan will go their separate ways soon, and Lu Gan's hatred will naturally become the least painful thing. Furthermore, Lu Gan has repeatedly caused trouble in Ziliang this time. As long as the Xianbei emperor doesn't have a headache, he will definitely not pay as much attention to Lu Gan as before. A prince who is not taken seriously, a rival who may never meet again. Fan Qinjiao talked about fear again. But if the person Lu Gan hates is Bailey Fengming, Lu Gan will definitely retaliate with his hatred. Even if he spends everything he has, he will still do it to the best of his ability. Efforts to instigate Xianbei will be detrimental to Ziliang. Not only will Bailey Fengming, who is fighting for power, be attacked from both sides, but the innocent people of Ziliang will be plunged into dire straits. Fan Qinjiao must not gamble with Bailey Fengming's future, let alone use the comfort of the people of Ziliang to gamble. But overnight, Bailey Rongs and Lu Gan went from being in private collusion to now being relatively silent. Yu Luqian is very profitable to Bailey Rongs. Of course, Bailey Rongs also hopes to get secret assistance from Lu Gan through joining forces. So now that the situation is like this, it is no less important to Lu Gan and Bailey Rongs. Uzi broken arm. But compared to Lu Gan's dark and calm face all day long, Bailey Rongs not only did not dare to show his true anger on his face, but also went to the main camp in Ziliang every day, doing everything he could to the prince. The royal brother who greets you with care and concern. Suffering such humiliation is driving Bailey Rongs crazy. And the unrest in the palace also gave concubine Yu headaches. The emperor issued an edict praising the prince's bravery and prowess, and for a time the prince's reputation in the court increased day by day. The day for the marriage of the princes of the right age is coming soon. The official residence, which originally had no hope for the prince, is now trying its best to send the portraits and name cards of the official ladies to the palace. Compared to Fenji Palace, where invitations are like snow, Yue Palace receives very few invitations. It is not an exaggeration to say that the number is pitiful. The most hateful thing is that Queen Zhen 11 not only accepted all the invitations, but also treated all the women on the invitations equally. Her attitude was so vague that concubine Yu could not find out even now, who was Queen Zhen 11's favorite. The daughter of a well-known official family. Facing Queen Zhengzi, who dropped her in mid-air without or killing her, concubine Yu was so angry that her teeth were about to be broken. Why does my sister look so bad? But it's hard to rest during this time. In Fenji Palace, Queen Zhen 11 smiled and looked at the silent concubine Yu, who was graceful and elegant, with all kinds of manners. "Don't you know better than me why I look so bad?" Concubine Yu suppressed the hatred in her heart, frowned, and concern flowed out of her eyes. "I heard that His Highness the Crown Prince was seriously injured in the assassination, and I was worried about him. So what if your son has a high reputation now? If he didn't pay for it with his life, what can you be proud of?" Queen Zhen 11 pursed her lips indifferently. "Care leads to chaos, and lack of desire leads to strength. Moreover, children and grandchildren will have their own blessings. Even if we worry about it in the palace, I'm afraid we can't compete with God's will." My sister said yes, no. Concubine Yu could naturally hear these words as an insinuation that she was meddlesome, but which woman in the palace was not plotting for her son? She didn't believe that Queen Zhen 11 could really do whatever she wanted. Queen Zhen 11 has long been accustomed to Concubine Yu's sweet talk and hidden swords in her smile. She also knows that the purpose of Concubine Yu coming to her today is just to know which girl she has fallen in love with, so that she can take the opportunity to block the road and rob the girl. Go to the third prince's side. If it had been earlier, Queen Zhen 11 would have disdained to make excuses with Concubine Yu. But now that the prince's eye disease has recovered, she no longer has any worries. Isn't it just emptiness and hypocrisy? Just let the horse come over. Concubine Yu did not expect that Queen Zhen 11, who had always been silent and withdrawn, would be so difficult to deal with that it made people scratch her skin with hatred, and her mouth was so airtight that it seemed like it was covered with a layer of paste. From noon to evening, Concubine Yu didn't find a single word she wanted to hear from Queen Zhen 11. As unitary hour approached, Yan Qian's shout suddenly came from the courtyard of Fenji Palace, "The Emperor is here." End of this chapter. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The legitimate daughter of the prosperous medical fragrance will not marry. Author, Jinchi. Chapter 286. Chapter 286 Tang Yuan with black heart stuffing. The Crown Prince has been in the limelight recently. Emperor Yongchang, who always took into consideration the reputation and popular support of the people, would come to Fenji Palace to accompany Queen Zhengzi for lunch and dinner for several days in a row, and even stayed overnight when he was not busy. Fenji Palace. Just like this, the people in the main city all praised the emperor for his wisdom and martial prowess. Emperor Yongchang wanted to be famous throughout the ages, so he came to Fenji Palace to work harder. Concubine Yu braced herself up and knelt at the door of Fenji Palace ahead of Empress Zhen 11. "I would like to express my greetings to the emperor. Long live the emperor, long live the emperor." The twisting waist is enchanting and charming, and the half-downturned phoenix eyes are just right to raise the 3 points, which can be described as charming. "Why did my beloved concubine come to Fenji Palace today?" Emperor Yongchang took the initiative to help Concubine Yu up. He had been eating vegetarian food at Queen Zhengzi's place for the past few days. Now that he saw the sweet and delicious Concubine Yu, he was naturally distraught. Concubine Yu pretended to be sad, her eyes filled with water. "How can I see the emperor if I don't come to the queen?" Emperor Yongchang heard it and was complaining to him. Unlike the dignified Queen Zhengzi, Concubine Yu was always coquettish and liked to play off her temper. Only when she was with Concubine Yu did Emperor Yongchang feel that he was still young and strong. Looking at Concubine Yu's affectionate face now, how could Emperor Yongchang not feel pity or feel distressed? Empress Zhen 11 walked over with the support of Lily, with a deep apology in her eyes, and then asked Lily, "Send someone to send the potted duck cooked by me to Yu Palace." Emperor Yongchang knew clearly that he had neglected Queen Zhengzi for many years because of Concubine Yu. Now faced with Queen Zhengzi's magnanimity and tolerance, he said that he did not feel any guilt at all. Empress Zhen 11 sneered in her heart at the guilt in Emperor Yongchang's eyes, but she continued with a smile on her face, "After all, the emperor has indeed not been to his sister's palace for a long time. It's all my concubine's fault. The emperor has ignored the feelings of other sisters in this palace. The other sister's nice words made Emperor Yongchang let go of concubine Yu's hand. During this period of time, Emperor Yongchang was with Empress Zhen 11, and the concubines in the harem dared not speak out. After all, Empress Zhen 11 was the master of the sixth palace. But if he suddenly went to Yuyu Palace from the Empress, what would happen if he suddenly went to the Yuyu Palace? If the other concubines find out, I don't know what kind of rumors will spread. The main thing is, if word spreads outside the palace and the people know about it, what should they think? Emperor Yongchang did not want his reputation accumulated over many days to be ruined by one day's affairs. There is no need to go to such trouble. Since I am here, I want to accompany the Queen. Emperor Yongchang walked to Queen Zhengxi's side and took the initiative to take the Queen's hand from Lily's raised arm. Concubine Yu stared at the Emperor and Queen's leaving figures with her charming eyes, and she almost vomited a mouthful of blood on the spot. The duck that reached its beak just flew away. Who can hold it back? Concubine Yu always thought that as long as Bailey Rongs could win over the full support of others, she would be able to gain a firm foothold in the court, but only now did she realize that she was completely wrong. If you don't get the Emperor's attention, no matter how hard you try, it will be useless. Back to Yuyu Palace, concubine Yu's face is as dark as she wants. Aunt Ying, who had been waiting at the door for a long time, hurriedly came over and whispered, "Mother, there is a letter from Princess Yunyu." Concubine Yu thought for a while and hurriedly entered the palace with the help of Aunt Ying. Princess Yunyu has been studying medicine for a year and a half, and every 3 months she will quietly send a letter to the palace to report that she is safe. Concubine Yu fumbled for the envelope in her hand, her gloomy brows gradually becoming brighter. If she remembers correctly, Princess Yunyu was not the only one who went to study medicine as a disciple. Thinking like this, Concubine Yu became more determined and immediately wrote a letter. But there are 2 letters. Mother Ying, please send someone to deliver these 2 letters to Yunyu and the 3rd prince respectively. Remember to be quick. Yes, Empress. 2 days later, the army located 100 miles away from Ziliang received a letter from the court. It was almost as expected by Fan Qinjiao. On the grounds that the prince was seriously injured, the emperor declined to let the prince continue to see him off. In order not to be disrespectful to the country, he ordered the prince to select 1,000 elite soldiers to continue escorting the 3rd prince of Xianbei until he arrived in Xianbei. Bailey Fengming knew that the fewer spies who followed him back to the main city, the safer it would be for Ayao to meet Huajianan, so he called Xiaoxian to the main tent that day, and 2 hours later the plan was drawn up. Continue the list. On this list, there are not only the people in the court and even the spies planted by concubine Yu, but also the soldiers who dislike the prince in various ways. The reason given by Bailey Fengming is very simple. Since we are all capable, or feel that we are capable, of course we have to do what others are unwilling or even unable to do. As the saying goes, those who are able work hard. When he heard his name being read out by Xiaoxian, the soldiers who had scheming against the prince along the way almost felt no regrets and cried on the spot. It will take at least more than half a month to arrive at the main city of Xianbei from here. Just thinking about it makes my legs feel heavy. And just when the soldiers who were sent to Xianbei were racking their brains to think about how to please His Highness the Crown Prince to make up for their youth and frivolity, Xiaoxian, who walked out of the main camp in Ziliang again, announced loudly, after an hour, the prince will head back to the main city. Soldiers! I cried completely. Standing by the window of the main camp tent, Fan Qinjiao looked at the regretful major generals in the camp with helplessness and understanding. This is Bailey Fengming. It is as unpredictable and hard to guard against as sesame glutinous rice balls. It looks white and waxy on the outside, but when you reach out and break it, you will know that apart from the skin, the heart inside has long been left with only one color. Black. It's really too dark. Gan had no influence on Ziliang's arrangements. In other words, now he is just worried that he won't be able to make it in time, so he doesn't have the heart to worry about anything else. 2 hours later, almost all of the accompanying army was left behind, and some were selected from the 1,000 elite soldiers they supported. The other armies were already standing in the camp in Ziliang, ready to go. A quarter of an hour later, Fan Qinjiao followed Bailey Fengming into the carriage. Sitting by the car window, Fan Qinjiao has been silently looking at the camp where Bailey Rong's lives, playing with an inconspicuous small porcelain bottle in his hand. Not long after, the curtain of the tent was opened, and it was not Bailey Rongs who came out. The Major General came in a hurry and knelt down under the window of the car where the prince was riding. He reported loudly, "Your Highness, the Third Highness is exhausted from the fatigue of traveling, and his body cannot bear it. His Highness Nazan is thinking about the health of His Highness. Therefore, I sent my subordinates to report to His Highness the Crown Prince for setting off first, hoping that His Highness the Crown Prince would take care of himself." Such a loud resignation, all the soldiers in the camp could hear it clearly without any effort. The Major General, who was kneeling on the ground, spoke passionately and sincerely. If Bailey Fengming didn't agree, the hat would be placed on his head in an instant without caring about his siblings. Fan Qinjiao's heart is like a clear mirror. How can a person who uses coercion and inducement in such an appropriate manner look like a sick person? Furthermore, Bailey Rongzijun's voice was thick and powerful for several days in a row. In addition to being a bit evil, his complexion could be considered rosy and shiny. Such a person may have to drive 100 miles without feeling any discomfort. Fan Qinjiao didn't believe it, and neither did Bailey Fengming. In response to Fan Qinjiao's deep thoughts, Bailey Fengming already said, "In that case, let Brother Three Emperors have a good rest." The Major General, who was kneeling on the ground, was obviously relieved. But before he could breathe out, when His Highness the Crown Prince spoke again, his breath was completely stuck in his throat. After burning incense, the team returning to the main city slowly drove out of the camp. Surprisingly, the camp did not become quiet because of this. Bailey Rongs, who was lying on the wooden bed in the camp tent, was wondering when he saw the Major General returning in a hurry. Looking at the Major General's pale face, Bailey Rongs frowned and asked, "What happened? Why is the camp so noisy?" The Major General knelt heavily on the ground, feeling depressed and helpless, and said, "I am reporting to His Highness the Third Highness. His Highness the Prince said that bandits are rampant in the Palladium area. This shows that there is no peace in Xianbei. In order to ensure the safety of the Third Highness, His Highness the Prince will send the remaining all the troops were left to His Highness the Third. In other words, except for the fact that the Prince and Princess Jingping are gone, everyone else is still there." Bailey Rongs. Suddenly, I felt that the world in front of me was really spinning. End of this chapter. The legitimate daughter of the prosperous medical fragrance will not marry. Author, Jinchi. Chapter 287. Chapter 287. A brief moment of mutual love. At the same time that the post-envoy brought the letter from Emperor Yongchang, he also secretly sent the letter from Concubine Yu to Bailey Rongs. Concubine Yu didn't mention much else in her letter. She just asked him to avoid the front line and go to a place called Yongzi town south of Ziliang. Bailey Rongs has always obeyed his mother's requests. That's why Bailey Rongs pretended to be sick and stayed, just waiting for Bailey Fengming to leave first, and then he acted quietly. Whether he is a prince or a prince, if he wants to gain a firm foothold in the court, he needs the support of the people and the army, so Bailey Rongs expected that Bailey Fengming would definitely agree to his request. But what Bailey Rongs never expected was, in Bailey Fengming, all the army was left behind by him. With nearly 1,000 elite soldiers following behind him, Bailey Rongs felt a headache just thinking about it. What's even more hateful? He and Gan jointly planned the Palladium bandit incident. Now Bailey Fengming had left so many pairs of eyes for him on the grounds that Xianbei was not stable. If he didn't want them, wouldn't he have opened them in his own face? Slap your mouth. Similarly, Fan Qinjiao didn't expect Bailey Fengming to be able to use the snake-killing stick so smoothly. Bailey Rongs must have been hiding some ulterior secrets when he pretended to be ill, but now he is forced to bear the gaze of thousands of pairs of eyes due to Bailey Fengming's kindness. Even if she hadn't witnessed such an outrageous thing with her own eyes, she could still imagine Bailey Rong's constipated expression. Lanja, who had been lurking in the dark, waited until the carriage had completely driven out of the camp, then jumped onto the carriage. It was Xiaoxian who was driving the carriage who was startled. Looking at the child sitting quietly next to him, with no intention of speaking at all, Xiaoxian knew that he was Miss Qinjiao's person, but despite this, he still couldn't tell how he felt. This child has not said a word since he saw him until now. A very handsome young man has such a rocky temper. I wonder if he will be able to find a wife in the future. Lanja had been recommended to Xiaoxian by his own lady when she was treating the prince's injuries. However, Lanja was born with a wild temper and didn't like to deal with others. Now he looked at the man next to him with a face as black as coal and a stubble. The vicissitudes of life have forced the uncle to show his sentimentality, which just feels baffling. Your Highness, the Crown Prince looks normal, so why did you find such a strange and eccentric bodyguard? In the carriage, the sound of turning pages could be heard loudly. Fan Qinjiao looked sideways and saw someone with a black heart and lungs sitting on the soft couch of the carriage. His bony fingers were holding a book, and his clear long eyelashes were slightly drooped, covering his eyes. He kept those dark eyes that were always hard to see through. As if aware of her gaze, he spoke slowly, Xiaoxian just reported to me secretly. After delivering the message, the post envoy quietly entered the camp where the three emperors lived. Fan Qinjiao was able to get through it with just one click. There is only one person who can buy off the post envoy and make Bailey Rongs humbly comply with the request. Bailey Fengming turned the page of the book again. It is indeed Concubine Yu, but Xiaoxian did not read anything useful in the letter. He only saw that Concubine Yu ordered the three emperor brothers to leave for a place called Yongzi Town. Yongzi Town. Fan Qinjiao lowered his eyes slightly and considered this place carefully. For a moment, he suddenly raised his lips into a faint smile. Concubine Yu also had Princess Yunyu under her knees. She remembered that in her previous life, in order to please the emperor who always advocated medical skills, Concubine Yu reluctantly sent Princess Yunyu to study medicine. Later, when she became the third prince's concubine, she was in the palace. I met Princess Yunyu once. Fan Qinjiao even remembered that Princess Yunyu said personally that the sect she wanted to be a disciple of was Yaeshi Pavilion. And Yongzi Town is at the foot of Yaeshi Pavilion. When Concubine Yu came to the Hua family to prevent her mother from reconciling, she must have been entrusted by her grandfather. She had always been curious about how her grandfather persuaded Concubine Yu to sell it to her in such a big way. Until she found that Fan Swinning was missing, she found out why. I'm afraid that Fan Swinning left the main city with Princess Yunyu. After all, for Concubine Yu, it is always good to have one more person to serve her daughter. Furthermore, if Fan Swinning can really learn something, he can also be used by her. It can be said that it kills two birds with one stone. Think again of the arrogance when I saw Zy Ling last time in Tangyun Xiazu. Fan Qinjiao was even more aware, fearing that Fan Swinning was about to come back. Seeing that Fan Qinjiao hadn't spoken for a long time, Bailey Fengming raised his eyes from the book and said, no matter what Brother Sanhuang does when he goes to Yongzi Town, it will always be more convenient for you and me. Fan Qinjiao put the porcelain bottle he had been playing with into his sleeve. Whether he goes or stays, to me it's just a matter of a bottle of medicine. Even if Bailey Rongs was following closely behind, she would still have plenty of ways to keep him from seeing and hearing. Bailey Fengming smiled, but did not ask Xiaoxian to follow Bailey Rong's whereabouts. Concubine Yu was extremely cautious, otherwise she would not have stated the purpose in her letter to Bailey Wrongs. Bailey Fengming would never let Xiaoxian come forward at this time. Once he was alerted, both he and the queen would become completely passive. Fan Qinjiao also had no intention of letting Bailey Fengming send people to follow him. In other words, even if Bailey Fengming did send someone, she would stop him. Yakushi Pavilion is the most prosperous medical sect in Ziliang, and its medical medicine sect has a large number of talents. Xiaoxian is Bailey Fengming's confidant, and she will definitely not let him risk his life. The original quietness returned to the carriage. Bailey Fengming continued to read, while Fan Qinjiao looked out the window and admired the scenery, or opened the medicine box he brought with him and slowly prepared various new medicinal materials. It was getting dark. In order to allow Bailey Fengming to drink the medicine on time, Fan Qinjiao simply set up a medicine stove in the carriage. Bailey Fengming didn't know when he raised his eyes from the book, and just looked at the girl waiting by the medicine stove quietly. A few strands of broken hair were scattered around her cheeks, unlike other ladies from famous families who paid great attention to their appearance. But it is fresh and natural, making people feel more comfortable. After the bitter concoction was cooked, before Fan Qinjiao could speak, Bailey Fengming took the initiative to come to the low table, picked up the still steaming concoction and took it into his mouth bit by bit, although he did not drink it due to the temperature. However, his dark eyes were as calm as water, without any trace of doubt. Fan Qinjiao's heart trembled, and he suddenly realized that he had believed in her from the beginning to the end. Unknowingly, Bailey Fengming had drank all the soup in the bowl, but Bailey Fengming still held the bowl and never put it down. Fan Qinjiao was confused. What? Bailey Fengming remained silent and did not answer. Fan Qinjiao approached worriedly and instinctively groped for his wrist. The result was that those beautiful 5 fingers grasped the wrist, and the world was spinning for a while, and then he fell into a warm embrace. The voice of Bailey Fengming sounded in my ears with a slight smile, "Take a nap, I'll call you when I'm eating." Fan Qinjiao. "Your Highness, you are really not afraid that I will die quietly next time you are in danger, are you?" Bailey Fengming seemed to have heard Fan Qinjiao's inner curse, and whispered again, "With you here, I can't bear to die." With his ears wet and wet, half of his body was numbed by the hot breath from his breath, and his cheeks felt unnaturally hot. Fan Qinjiao quickly closed his eyes, refusing to indulge in any more debauchery with someone. Bailey Fengming looked at the red and transparent ear shell, smiled slightly, and while holding her thin body in his arms, he lazily leaned on the soft couch behind him with her. Fan Qinjiao originally wanted to escape Bailey Fengming, but he fell asleep without even thinking about it. This sleep was extremely deep, and I didn't even have a dream. When I opened my eyes again, the sky was completely dark. A bonfire has been set up outside the carriage. When Fan Qinjiao looked out of the car window, he saw Lang Ya standing silently on the side, while Xiaoxian asked Bailey Fengming to go with him to catch wild animals in the forest. The incense stick lasts for a period of time. Xiaoxian was nearly 30 years old. Although he was not considered a veteran in the court, his official position was of the first rank. Bailey Fengming's kung fu was all taught by him. Now it is reasonable for the master to want to test the apprentice's skills. Bailey Fengming was thinking about refusing, but when he raised his eyes and saw that Fan Qinjiao was already awake, he nodded. Xiaoxuan's excited eyes shone, and he almost disappeared in a flash. After just one stick of incense, Xiaoxian was no longer excited, and Xiaoxian no longer shined. Look at the birds in front of you, and then look at the wild boar that is only breathing in front of Bailey Fengming. Xiaoxian wanted to cry. Even the lunatic Lin Yi couldn't catch a wild boar with his bare hands. "Your Majesty, your Highness is so wild, aren't you afraid of scaring Miss Qinjiao?" Fan Qinjiao stepped out of the carriage, looked at the wild boar on the ground and said softly, "Wild boar is sweet and salty, and should be roasted to remove the cold. The meat is leaner and less fat. It is the best medicinal diet for nourishing the weak, dispelling wind and detoxifying. Xiaoxian. I'd better kill the pig. End of this chapter. The legitimate daughter of the prosperous medical fragrance will not marry. Author, Jinchi. Chapter 288. Chapter 288. Long time no see, Fanswinning. Since the army was not following them, the carriage moved forward much faster. 2 days later, Fan Qinjiao and Bailey Fengming arrived at Ziliang. At the same time, Bailey Rongs also followed concubine Yu's instructions and came to Yongzi town, followed by 1,000 elite soldiers. Dajin had already suspected it, but he didn't dare to say it clearly because of Bailey Rongs' identity. Bailey Rongs called the major general to his side and told him, "You stay and lead them to camp where they are. If you can bribe them, do it now. If you can't, just cut them off. In the military camp, the life and death of soldiers are not up to them. If there is one more or one less, no one will seriously check it." The major general took the order and went to order the elite soldiers to set up camp and pacify them. However, these elite soldiers were not as good as the new recruits who followed Bailey Fengming. Among them were veterans who had been on the battlefield for a long time. They completely scorned the major general's comfort, and even threatened to return to the main city of Ziliang together with many veterans. The new recruits had no idea to begin with. Seeing the veterans making preparations to leave, they began to follow suit. For a time, the camp was in chaos. In such a situation, not to mention the major general, even Bailey Rongs was helpless. Suddenly, a gust of cool wind came. The surrounding leaves are swaying, and when you smell it carefully, there is a faint floral fragrance in the wind. The soldiers who were arguing just now and clamoring to leave suddenly lost their sight. Gradually, as if their souls had been taken away, they fell to the ground one by one. The cool wind blew, and nearly 1,000 soldiers fell to the ground without knowing whether to live or die. Bailey Rongs did not fall down because he was far away from the camp, but as he held the horse with his hand, his mind began to feel heavy. He forced himself to bite the tip of his tongue to stay awake. In his hazy vision, he actually saw a person. A group of young girls in green clothes walked out slowly. Bailey Rongs steeled himself and looked at the girl who was getting closer to him. For a moment, he actually saw the shadow of Fan Qinjiao in her body. But as the girl got closer, he realized that he had seen it wrong. The girl's bun exposed her temples, her eyebrows were lightly swept, and her elegant jade face was covered with ochre makeup, which highlighted the charming maturity on her originally immature face, which captivated the soul. Fan Qinjiao's dark eyes have always been as clear as the moon, completely natural and beautiful, without any embellishment of rouge and gouache. Just when Bailey Rongs was confused, the girl stood in front of him, holding a pill in her soft palm and presented it to him. "If the Third Highness does not want to fall with those soldiers, then use this solution, take the medicine." Bailey Rongs narrowed his eyes defensively. "Who are you?" The girl's pretty lips raised an enchanting arc. "My maid, Fanswinning, has met His Highness the Third Highness." Bailey Rongs seemed to have heard of this name somewhere, but he couldn't remember it for a while, until Fanswinning said the name of Princess Yunyu and told Bailey Rongs that he had received the secret message from concubine Yu. It was here that Xian cleared Bailey Rongs' eyes, and Bailey Rongs finally believed that Fanswinning was his mother's concubine. Fanswinning bowed and extended her hand in a gesture of invitation. "Princess Yunyu has been waiting for His Highness the Third Highness in Yongzi town for a long time." Bailey Rongs glanced at the unconscious army with concern. Fanswinning pursed her lips shyly, with a smile as bright as a flower. "Your Highness, there is no need to worry. They just had a good sleep. When they wake up, they will forget everything here." Bailey Rongs never thought that the girl in front of him could be so powerful. Thinking that Fan Qinjiao might not be like this, Bailey Rongs' eyes were filled with a layer of appreciation when he looked at Fanswinning. "This will be helpful, Miss Fan." Fanswinning looked at the handsome and suave man in front of her, as if she was in another world. In the dream, she was such an outstanding man who loved her so much, and he even became the new emperor of Ziliang in the end. Although there will always be Fan Kinjao between her and him, Fan Swining, who clearly remembers every detail in the dream, knows that it is with the help of this man that she is able to hurt Fan Kinjao like this. This even made Fan Kinjao miserable until he died. Now Bailey Rongs, who loved her deeply in the dream and could be a sharp blade to hurt Fan Kinjao, was standing in front of him in such a real way. This was what Fan Swining had been looking forward to in his dreams. Because she knew in her heart that only by grasping this man could she have everything she wanted and get rid of Fan Kinjao, whom she had always hated. Fan Swining led the way into Bailey Rong's Yongzi town and soon saw his sister sitting in a tea house. Eldest sister Bailey Rongs looked at his sister whom he had not seen for a long time and said that he would be lying if he said he didn't miss her. Princess Yunyu has been indoctrinated by her mother and concubine since she was a child to assist her younger brother, so now when she saw Bailey Rongs, she felt more calm. My mother-in-law wrote to say that you have been quite unhappy in the court recently, Shun. I asked you to come to my place to relax because I was worried that you would be upset. You don't need to think too much about it. Just enjoy the scenery here for the next few days. Bailey Rongs frowned. He didn't believe that his mother and concubine worked so hard just to let him come here to relax. But now that his eldest sister said this, he could only nod in agreement. Fan Swining heard that Bailey Rongs would stay for a few days, and she pursed her lips in surprise and smiled. I remember that in the dream, Fan Kinjao was completely reduced to the third prince and her tool after the prince's proposed marriage. There is still some time before the wedding. As long as she grasps the opportunity to get along with the third prince, she will definitely make the third prince fall in love with her. Even if the third prince marries Fan Kinjao like in the dream, he will still give her save a place. Fan Kinjao, who was 100 miles away, didn't know that he had been plotted. As it was getting dark, Xiaoxian drove his carriage to Pengcheng, 30 miles away from Huaishang. Pengcheng is not as prosperous as the main city, but it is also like a horse like a dragon. Xiaoxian randomly found an inn, and Fan Kinjao followed Bailey Fengming out of the carriage, only to realize that it was the time for the night market in the city to start. The whole city is brightly lit, and the beams are like daylight. Various lanterns are hung on the vendors' stalls, and the sounds of shouting and selling can be heard endlessly. People passing by linger here, and their cheerful laughter can be heard everywhere. Fan Kinjao looked at this lively and warm scene with a hint of surprise in his eyes. I have been living in 2 generations, but I have never been to a night market, so I don't know the hustle and bustle of the night market. The slightly cold hand was held by slender fingers. When Fan Kinjao came to his senses, he was already being pulled towards the center of the lively street by Bailey Fengming. Fan Kinjao was stunned. What are you doing? Bailey Fengming smiled fondly. It's rare to have some free time, so I want you to accompany me around. Hearing this, Fan Kinjao felt very warm in his heart. He was like that, he could see what she was thinking with just one glance. Fan Kinjao glanced sideways at the young man next to him who was a full head taller than him. Bailey Fengming, actually you don't have to do this for me. Bailey Fengming smiled lightly. Walking side by side with you and strolling around is what I have always wanted to do. Fan Kinjao's face turned red and he had no choice but to look away. This man really knows the word sweet words very well. At the night market, people are coming and going, and there is a lot of traffic. The faces of the people walking there are all kinds of masks, and the scenery is unique. Originally, there were very few people who attended the scene without masks. Coupled with the unusually eye-catching faces of Fan Kinjao and Bailey Fengming, they almost quickly became the focus of people's attention. Fan Kinjao didn't like being watched like this, so he frowned slightly, and was about to lower his head to avoid the surrounding eyes, when he realized that Bailey Fengming walking beside him seemed to be the most attractive one. Many young women wearing masks could not regain their consciousness for a long time just looking at Bailey Fengming's beautiful face. As a prince, Bailey Fengming's status is inherently special. Once he is recognized by others, it will soon spread to the ears of the people in the palace. Although this is not the main city, it cannot be taken lightly. Just passing by a stall selling masks, Fan Kinjao stopped and randomly picked 2 masks to cover each other's faces. Bailey Fengming smiled softly under the fox mask. "No need to be so careful." Fan Kinjao said, "Be careful when sailing the ship that lasts 10,000 years. Seeing that she was serious, Bailey Fengming didn't argue and took her hand and continued walking forward. Suddenly, there was a flow of people behind him. Bailey Fengming's hands wrapped around Fan Kinjao's waist to prevent her from being scattered by the crowd. At the same time, a scream was heard from far to near. End of this chapter. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The legitimate daughter of the prosperous medical fragrance will not marry. Author, Jinchi. Chapter 289. Chapter 289. The scum of the Hua family. Several drunken dandies came out of a restaurant not far away. A child of 7 or 8 years old seemed to be playing too hard and actually bumped into those dudes. One of the dudes was knocked so hard that the back of his head hit the pillar at the door of the restaurant. When the other dandies saw this, they grabbed the child by the collar and threw the child out hard without saying a word. Under such gravity, children fly up and down like balls. Boom! There was a muffled sound, and the child fell with blood on his face and howled loudly. The people around him turned pale with fright when they saw this sudden scene. The child's mother ran over from a short distance away. Although she was worried about her son, she still knelt down in front of those dandies and kowtowed and begged, "Please, young masters, please let go of my child. He is still young and doesn't know how to behave. Why don't you apologize to these young masters here?" Several other dudes whistled frivolously when they saw that the woman was young and beautiful. "This little lady's appearance is quite a mark. How about you play with us for a night, and we can forget about today's events? With such a beautiful face, it would be a pity not to be taken seriously by others." Several dudes surrounded the woman. Not only did they speak loosely, but they also stretched out their hands towards the woman, touching her face, shoulders, and lower back. The woman was terrified but did not dare to struggle. She could only continue to kowtow and beg for mercy, "Please, young masters, please let my child go." The woman's head banged on the ground, and blood soon oozed out. Seeing how stubborn this woman was, the other dandies immediately lost interest and said, "Those who don't know good and evil are really heart-wrenching, but we don't care about this. If you want to beg, go and beg my elder brother for mercy." Hearing this, the woman hurriedly looked at the dude who was hit, but before she could ask for mercy, she saw that the dude who had recovered his consciousness had already strode to her side. The dude grabbed the woman's hair, pulled her back hard, and cursed angrily, "My body is something that you untouchables can hit? Since you like kowtowing so much, I will let you kowtow as much as you want tonight." As he finished speaking, he grabbed the woman's hair and forced her up from the ground, then viciously slammed her into the wall not far away. The woman's head was instantly filled with blood, and her vision turned black. She fell heavily to the ground. The dude didn't seem to understand his hatred, and even ordered the other dudes, "What are you doing? Why don't you go and trample that little one to death? Cry, cry, cry. It's so noisy. Since the eldest brother has given the order, we will obey it." Other dudes whistled again and swayed towards the children not far away. The surrounding people turned pale with fear, but no one dared to step forward to stop them. These dandies were famous young men in Pengcheng, how could they afford to offend them? This is what Fan Kinjao saw when he followed Bailey Fengming to push aside the crowd in front of him. A group of young men in their prime actually killed a woman and child. Bailey Fenming's eyes were also dark, and there was clearly a mass of gas condensing in the palm of his hand under his wide sleeves. Unexpectedly, just as he turned over slightly, he saw an extremely fast figure passing by from a distance. As the dandies set their feet towards the child, the figure took the child into his arms and rolled away. As he moved to the side, it was pressed heavily on his body. Everything happened so suddenly that everyone was stunned. Several dudes stomped on the ground, wailing in pain. Everyone came back to their senses in shock and saw the man holding the child under him lying face down on the ground. His appearance was unclear, but judging from his body shape and bones, he should be only 17 or 18 years old. Age. Bailey Fenming withdrew his inner strength from the palm of his hand and calmly narrowed his eyes slightly. Seeing this, the leading dandy came over angrily and stepped on the man's back. "Who do you think you are? How dare you stop me from doing something?" The man lying on top of the child did not get up. Instead, he spat out a mouthful of blood due to the boy's trampling. When the people around him saw this, they all exclaimed in surprise. Bailey Fenming took the opportunity and whispered, "This man's martial arts skills are unfathomable, and these fancy tricks can't hurt him at all." Fan Kinjao frowned and took a deep breath. A strange fragrance could be caught in the air mixed with blood. "That's the smell of agrimony. 2. Poison." The dude who stepped on the man thought he had hurt the man, and continued to raise his foot and put it down again with extreme arrogance. When the other dudes came to their senses, they also walked over angrily, rolling up their sleeves and saying, "The man punched and kicked him, but no matter how hard they beat him, the unconscious man never let go of his arms around the child." Although the children were young, they could clearly distinguish between good and evil. Even though they were trembling with fear, they still had the courage to speak out, "Brothers, please stop. It's all my fault. It's my fault. It doesn't matter, please stop fighting about this, brother, stop fighting." The woman with her head covered in blood was clearly in pain and had no strength left, but she still gritted her teeth and climbed up. Regardless of her life or death, she rushed over and lay on the man's back, as if she wanted to repay the man for his help. When the people around him saw this, they were all moved. However, the leading dandy was so angry that his whole face became distorted, a bunch of untouchables. "I am the eldest grandson of a branch of the Hua family. Who are you, and you dare to go against me? Have you heard from the Hua family in the main city? Really? That's my second uncle. Believe it or not, I'm going to ask my second uncle to kill all of you." Fan Kinjao instantly tensed up his whole body, as if a fire was burning in his chest. She has been standing here for such a long time, but she has no idea that these beasts are actually members of the Hua family. In her last life, she was bewitched by Ziwiling and her daughter. She had been living in the Fan family. She didn't know the Hua family or even met them in person. Fan Kinjao only heard that after his grandfather was quartered by 5 horses, the old patriarch of the Hua family personally led the Hua family clan into the main city of the Hua family, and took advantage of the Hua family's heartbreak to plunder the Hua family's money. After the fall of the Hua family, he escaped from Ziliang with his clan members. Fan Kinjao in the previous life was no longer able to protect himself or worry about the side branches of the clan. In this life, Fan Kinjao only thought that as long as the Hua family survived, these side branches of the clan would have no chance to take advantage of it, so he never took it to heart. Now Fan Kinjao just feels that he was so wrong. Animals are animals. If they are not eliminated, they will cause trouble. End of this chapter. The legitimate daughter of the prosperous medical fragrance will not marry. Author, Jinchi. Chapter 290. Chapter 297 Ju Meridians. Fan Kinjao's murderous intent was leaking out, and even Bailey Fenming was aware of it. Are these people obstructing Ayao's eyes, Bailey Fengming leaned forward slightly and asked softly, with bloodthirsty killing hidden in his doting voice. The man in the palace has always been wary of the Hua family. The whole Hua family was forced to live under the shelter of others in order to save their lives. Even the uncles had to fake their own lives to save their lives. However, these branches of the Hua family killed the 9 clans in succession. You dare to say such things? Such a person is an eyesore. Fan Kinjao closed his eyes and suppressed the murderous intention in his heart. It's important to save people. As the saying goes, if the upper beam is not straight, the lower beam will be crooked. Only the complete decay of the Hua family clan will breed such beasts in human skin. If these beasts are killed in vain, not only will Bailey Fengming's hands be dirty, but also Bailey Fengming's hands will be dirty. It will scare other people in the clan. Cut the weeds and get rid of the roots. Fan Kinjao already has the charter in mind, so he is not in a hurry. Bailey Fengming stopped asking any more questions and turned his palms over again. Who? A gust of cool wind blew by, making the people unable to open their eyes. On the street, those dudes who were still continuing their evil deeds seemed to have been hit by something, and they all hit the nearby walls. The heavy blow caused these dudes to roll on the ground in pain. Facing this sudden pain, the dudes were frightened. They looked fiercely at the crowd, trying to see who had done something to them, but the crowd of people surrounded the entire street, making it impossible for them to find them. The leading dandy struggled to his feet and walked towards the man lying not far away again with resentment. Suddenly, another gust of wind hit, knocking the leading dandy to the ground. The leading dandy hit the ground with his head first, so he almost passed out without struggling this time. The other dudes are scared to death. Although they know that someone is doing it secretly, they are doing it secretly, but they are doing it openly. Furthermore, they know in their hearts that such a person with such deep inner strength is no match for them if they really fight. Who is so bold as to dare to attack our Hua family? We are a branch of the Hua family. If you attack us, your whole family will die. If you dare to attack our Hua family, just wait for us. Several dandies shouted harsh words to embolden them, but they didn't dare to stay any longer. They quickly helped the unconscious leader up, and they got into the carriage with the Hua family brand in embarrassment. As the carriage driven by those dandies drove out of the street, although the people were relieved for the mother, son, and man, they stayed away from the place for fear of the Hua family settling accounts in the future. Even the vendors on the street put away their stalls and fled. On other streets, in the blink of an eye, the originally bustling streets were deserted. The woman wanted to get up from the man beneath her, but she slid to the ground because of the pain all over her body. Fan Kinjao hurriedly walked over and helped the woman. Be careful. Although you have no broken bones, your muscles are obviously damaged. If you use brute force again, you may get the root of the disease. The woman looked at the masked woman next to her in surprise. You are. Fan Kinjao explained patiently, I am a doctor from the main city, and I just happened to pass by here. Hearing this, the woman hurriedly kowtowed to Fan Kinjao, please, you must save this young master. He is a good man. It is because of us that we have offended the Hua family in the city. The branch of the Huajia clan can be said to cover the sky with one hand in Pengcheng. There was once a person who was beaten up because he angered the Hua family. As a result, he died tragically on the roadside because no doctor in the city dared to treat him. Fan Kinjao gritted his teeth, swallowed his anger, and held the woman's shoulders. Don't worry, I will definitely save him. The inn I live in is not far from here. You, mother and son, can come with me. The woman originally didn't want to trouble Fan Kinjao, but when she saw her son's face was covered in blood, she had to say sheepishly, I really bothered the girl. Fan Kinjao shook his head and helped the woman stand up. Bailey Fengming, who had never spoken until now, knew that Ayao's temperament meant that he kept his word. Seeing that the man had no consciousness at all, he personally stepped forward and took the man's arm, trying to help him up. This situation almost made Xiaoxian, who was hiding in the dark, fall from the tree in shock. Your Highness, your approachable nature. It's really worrying for my subordinates. Xiaoxian sighed helplessly, and like a gust of wind, he settled beside Bailey Fengming. Without saying a word, he picked up the man and walked towards the inn. Lanja, who was still hiding in the dark, watched Xiaoxuan's leaving figure. He came forward without authorization and ignored his master's orders. If such a guard was left beside General Hualao, he would have been beaten 8 times a day. The child was pulled up from the ground by the woman, with a pair of big eyes flashing with pure doubts. Dad asked me to protect my mother before he died. Dad even said that I am a manly man who is not afraid of hardship and tiredness. Mom, it doesn't hurt to kiss me. Let's go back. We can save money on medical treatment and buy some more medicine for my mother. The woman felt so sad that she hugged her son and cried softly. Fan Kinjao, who was walking in front, felt cold in his heart. Children from poor families are all well educated, but if you look at the dudes from the Hua family clan, they are all raised to look like beasts despite being well dressed and well fed. What an irony! As the saying goes, if it is not broken, it cannot be established. If it is broken, it will be established. Since she saw this with her own eyes, she could never sit idly by and ignore it. If the Hua family really knew their mistakes and could correct them, she might give them a way out for the sake of her grandfather. If the Hua family clan is really a puddle of mud, even if she eradicates the roots, she must not leave any hidden dangers. Within a stick of incense, everyone walked back to the inn, and Fan Kinjao had a plan in mind. The woman took the child and was placed in the room where Fan Kinjao lived. Fan Kinjao followed Bailey Fengming to the next room. Xiaoxian put the man on his shoulders on the bed and stepped aside. Fan Kinjao walked to the bed and could see clearly. The man lying on the bed was indeed young and had good features. Even with his eyes closed, he could see that he was very handsome. He was similar in age to Bailey Fengming. Almost 17 or 18 years old. Fan Kinjao reached out and put his hand on the man's wrist, and a cold breath rushed through his body. When he was just on the street, Fan Kinjao expected that the man's abnormal reaction should be caused by poisoning, but even though he was prepared, he was still trembling with the coldness in his body. His shoulders suddenly sank, and his whole body was wrapped in the familiar purple fragrance. Fan Kinjao turned his head slightly and saw Bailey Fengming covering her shoulders with the big cloak. Bailey Fengming didn't say anything, just smiled faintly, and then sat back to read a book. Fan Kinjao calmed down and looked at the man on the bed. Those who understand medicine will know that the veins are dead when birds peck at the veins, cauldrons boil, fish fly, stones are thrown, ropes are untied, houses leak, and shrimps swim. It is recorded in medical records that sparrows peck 3 or 5 times in a row, a drop of water falls from the house leak in half a day, slings and stones fall apart when they are hard to find, and they are scattered in a mess with fingers. The boiling water is like a soup, and there is no need for medicine when the day is over and the night is dead. This man's pulse condition is like water in a cauldron, burning and boiling, with no exit and no entry, and the yin and yang qi are gone. Evidently it is the cauldron boiling, one of the 7 unique meridians. Fan Kinjao didn't know what kind of hatred this man had that made him poison him so heavily, but now that she had encountered him, she could never leave him alone. He stood up and walked around to the desk, quickly wrote a recipe on the rice paper and handed it to Xiaoxian. Then he looked at Lanja, who was standing at the door, and said, "Prepare a basin of silver charcoal and a bucket of hot water, hurry." Lanja nodded and followed Xiaoxian out of the door one after another. In late autumn, before it was time to burn charcoal, the innkeeper was confused when he heard that he wanted silver charcoal. Just looking at Langya's face, which was 3 points darker than charcoal, the shopkeeper's words of rejection were stuck in his throat and he couldn't get out. In the end, he could only accept his fate and give Langya the charcoal he bought in advance. Some. As the temperature in the room gradually increased, Fan Kinjao ordered again, close all the windows in the room, and then put the scissors on the table into the brazier to roast. Lanja took the order silently and followed it completely. Fan Kinjao took out the needle bag from his arms and dropped silver needles on the man one after another. When the last silver needle was inserted into the back of the man's head, the unconscious man who was originally lying on the bed suddenly began to become restless, although he was still unconscious. Fan Kinjao ordered Lanja to come over and hold the man down, take off his clothes and throw him into a bucket to soak. Without saying a word, Langya reached out and plucked off the man's clothes. Bailey Fengming, who had been sitting by the window, suddenly said, "Ayao, come here." End of this chapter.